instantly? DraftKings, you spoiling me now with these big payouts. Retired NFL smart guy Ryan Fitzpatrick. Break it down for us.
Just place your bet, and the bonus bets instantly appear in your account. Like magic. Like Fitz magic.
That's too much magic. It's too much magic.
Want to turn $5 into $200 instantly in bonus bets? Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, because life's more fun when you're in on the action. The crown is yours.
Excellent. Michael, I think we're going to start off with you. I think everybody's familiar with the campaign. It's had a lot of airtime, but a lot of people aren't really that familiar with the industry, its growth, when it came about, fantasy, how that works. I wonder if you could tell the audience a little bit about the industry per se.
Yeah, sure. So DraftKings is a company founded 11 years ago, originally as a daily fantasy product. And for those who are not as familiar with that, we often hear about people who do season-long fantasy sports, often football, where people get together at the beginning of the season, they draft teams, they play fantasy over the course of the year. DraftKings introduced a daily fantasy product, which was a disruptor of the market for the opportunity to be able to draft new teams each week for football, or each day for a daily sport like baseball or basketball, which gave people more flexibility throughout a season to be able to try different lineups and try different contests, and to also compete to win large amounts of money. And so it was a disruptive sort of change to the category about 10 years ago. And about 5 years ago, things evolved even further as sports betting and online casino were legalized by the Supreme Court. And so therefore, over the last 5 years, you start to see a lot of activity as states are making decisions to legalize those products. And we're now legal in sports betting in about 25 states, 24 states, and online casino in 5 states. So a lot of growth in the category, a lot of change in the category over the last several years. Is that correct? Yeah, there are certainly like a small group of sort of core competitors, but I think because of all the growth, you start to see a lot of other brands starting to consider ways of getting into the market as well. So we expect for it to be continued growth and competition as things continue to evolve. I think for us, one of the things that was interesting is start off as a sports brand in the fantasy space. Obviously, as the industry's evolved, including things like online casino, the category really is opening up and thinking about, like, what is it that we stand for as a brand, and how does that evolve as the industry evolves, and how does that impact decisions we make as a company from a, again, brand strategy and creative standpoint. And that was really something that we took a step back at sort of mid part of last year to really dig in, and for the purpose of this conversation today.
And Rachel and Jesse, feel free to pipe in this. Don't wait for me to ask a question if you have anything at all to add. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about that piece of creative or that campaign, and also where you're going with it. I know you're doing research, and so really interested in the research that you're doing and where it might be leading DraftKings in the future.
Sure. So I can talk a little bit about the research approach with this particular creative. So we really started out as a team, both DraftKings and Hawk Partners, aligning that we had to go into this research being super flexible. So we didn't really know what the research was going to look like. We didn't have a fully outlined proposed approach, but we knew that we needed to do internal stakeholder interviews to really understand what internally DraftKings team members believe could be potential, differentiators, drivers for the DraftKings brand. We also knew we needed to do qualitative and quantitative research, but again, what we were testing in those different phases and how that was going to look, we knew we needed to be really flexible with, and really let the research results and findings kind of drive what we would do in the next phase. So that was sort of upfront our initial approach to this. And another thing that we did that may be a little unique is typically, sometimes the brand strategy is kind of handled siloed from more of the marketing communications research. And we really took this in one approach and just went ahead to really try to uncover, talking to prospects and customers to really understand what this would look like. So, taking a more flexible approach, we started with our internal stakeholder interviews, again, to really understand what they felt like were differentiators for the brand. Once we had those, we felt pretty comfortable moving forward with qualitative interviews, again, being very flexible with it and ensuring, we could be iterative in what we were testing. And from that, again, continuing to incorporate the findings from our internal interviews as well, we built out a fairly robust quantitative survey that was then really meant to test and discover some hidden drivers for DraftKings, again, in terms of brand differentiation. And then upon kind of wrapping that up, the DraftKings team was able to take a step away and start to develop some of the more marketing communications, which we then tested, again, qualitatively, which felt like a good setting to be able to kind of quick and dirty, talk to some customers, make sure nothing's offensive, really understand what's resonating, to get a fuller picture of what that would look like for, again, for customers and then for DraftKings overall.
And who did you survey?
So we surveyed DraftKings customers was our largest base, but then we also talked to prospects who are playing primarily with competitors. We talked to future prospects, so those who are in states where it's not yet legal but are interested in betting. So we kind of spanned the range of who we were interviewing.
And I'm not sure who's best equipped to answer the question, but who is the online sports bettor? Is there one profile, one persona? Are there many? Do you segment the audience?
So you want to take that, Michael? All right, I'll jump in and then finish this. I don't know if there's one profile of the online sports bettor. I would say, to Rachel's point, for this research, we looked at a number of different audiences. Michael mentioned that they have an online casino. So we had to talk to online gamers, who are your more traditional legacy gamers or legacy on-site gamblers, in addition to online sports bettors, and as Rachel mentioned, kind of current and future prospects. So designing an approach for varied audiences, if you know the online gamer, it's very different than the online sports bettor. So designing an approach that would reach all of the audiences was a huge challenge. And I mean, I think to the point about flexibility, Michael and his team were great about giving us the flexibility to evolve discussion guides, survey drafts, and obviously reports off that. But it was important to keep in mind that we needed to reach all of these audiences. When we think about the online sports bettor, specifically to your question, Paul, I think one of the things we saw was a mix of kind of, there's a couple different buckets, and Michael can talk to the specific segments, but you have obviously the fans. There's a fan component of the online sports bettor that I think was present in all phases of research. And then you had the highly analytical kind of folks doing their research and treating this as more of a math problem than a fan that they needed to solve, than something that they were doing for their fandom. So again, pretty different audiences there. So even within more macro segments, I would say that there was still some significant customization and diving down we need to do. But Michael, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think just two things I would add is, one, I think the goal of the research in many ways is to figure out, like, what are those unifying mindset across customer base. So like, what is it that is common among sports bettors? How are casino players different? What's common among them? I think there's a lot of work to be done there just to figure out how to draw some of those themes out from the research. And I think the work that we did really helped there. And I think your point also, when you're asking about competition, I think we really wanted to just be honest with ourselves and understand, like, where are we winning today with customers? Like, where are there gaps that we need to make sure we're really addressing and doing better from whether it be a product standpoint or from a marketing standpoint. And so the research really helped us like diagnose what our sort of current status was and inform decisions we can make about sharpening definition of our brand.
So am I correct in saying, so there's the quantitative people, the analysts, and then there's the sports nuts? Are those the two main segments?
I think at like a high level, yes, but obviously it gets, when you think about like all the details of messaging, like it can get even more detailed than that.
Do you ever follow what NASCAR does? I don't know if they've spoken from our stage. They're fairly amazing. Every driver is sort of tailored to appeal to a different person.
Yeah.
One driver is tailored to appeal to women in the South. One driver is tailored, and that's what's on their websites and all. So they must have 30, 20 different segments, how they approach it. Do you ever see sports betting getting that detailed, or do you think one or two campaigns is sufficient?
So I think that the other thing to think about is like different sports, right? Different sports carry a daily sport versus a weekly sport. The complexity of drafting a baseball where there's more data, the data that goes into baseball decisions versus a weekend of golf. Like I think there's lots of different ways to think about what motivates somebody to bet on sports, and then depending on the sport, like what are the things that are driving those decisions?
Can I bet on golf?
You can bet on golf.
Can I bet on anything? Are there any sports I can't bet on?
Are there any sports you can't bet on? No.
Curling?
I'm sure you can figure out a bet on curling.
Well, and it's funny, Paul, because we started this, as Rachel said, it was well over a year. So we started it back in mid-22, and coming out of COVID, we had a ton of respondents who would say, I fell in love with betting on Korean baseball in the middle of COVID because that was the only thing going on in the world. And it's interesting, like especially those more analytical folks were, it's much less about betting on the Knicks or the Eagles and much more about, can they solve the problem and give themselves the best odds? It kind of doesn't matter what the sport is.
Maybe talk a little bit about The Crown Is Yours, that campaign. Sort of what do you think it did for the brand? How did you approach it? And I know that the research was done while the campaign was running. So do you think you're going to tweak the campaign as a result of the research?
So the Crown Is Yours, we just introduced at the start of this football season. So it's very new. And I think like any tagline, those things take time to build meaning into. So I think we are at like the earliest stage of that right now. But it was born out of the research that we did, which was really around understanding, consumers have motivation to compete and compete for money and to demonstrate their insight into sports or gaming. So The Crown Is Yours is meant to be a call to action for them to take on those challenges that they have, but then also to be a demonstration of our commitment to providing the best possible experience for them. And so, that's really what, we believe is core to being a great brand and delivering a great product and experience for our customer. That line is, meant to capture the spirit of that. And it's now upon us to build meaning into that in many ways over time. And honestly, like when we tackled this project, it was less about just what's the next ad campaign. That was certainly a piece of it, but it was also very much about how are we as a company going to live up to what this brand stands for. And so the whole process that we went through was not just a marketing team or an insights group working with Hawk Partners, but it was our product leads, our customer team, marketing for sure, the group that works on all the operations of the product and promotion, all were core stakeholders in this project because we want to make sure that what we end up delivering at the end is not just an advertising campaign, but really what the entire company is going to get behind.
Anything to add, Rachel, Jesse?
No, that's
and so let's go back to brand imagery. What's internally the kind of corporate image for the brand, and is that where it wants to be?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Recreation, finance. I mean,
it's an entertainment. It's an entertainment.
It's an entertainment
Absolutely.
brand. Okay. Is there? You may not be able to answer this just because lots of corporate would not want you to answer it. But is there much churn? And do you tend to go after retention or acquisition in your marketing?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a combination of both, right? You obviously, especially as new states are legalizing, there's a lot of focus on building market share as new states legalize. So there's no question about that. But at the same time, we of course are looking to retain customers throughout the year. So whether that be football fans coming back year over year to football, or whether that be people, finding their second sport that they want to, either bet on or fantasy. There's a combination of how do you retain and how do you acquire. It's both.
Are people tend to be one sport, or are they more bettors and they just go across anything hockey than football and baseball?
Yeah, it totally varies. I think football is our biggest, is the biggest sport. but there are lots of people who are single sport, and then there are certainly many that will cross over to multiple sports.
And do you do creative testing?
Yeah, I mean, all of the, digital work that's in market is heavily tested and optimized over time. Like any brand today is really looking at the data and what's performing and figuring out what are those levers to pull to drive performance.
And Rachel and Jesse, I guess your role was principally within the development of the kind of creative theme and brand image and that side of it.
And the really driving the research.
And driving the
Yeah,
research.
so-
But the research was really focused on not creative, but more kind of brand and messaging.
Yeah, higher level kind of brand
Got it.
strategy.
Do you do a lot in the sports field?
I'm sorry?
Do you do a lot of this in the sports field?
A lot of market research.
Yeah, but specifically in sports.
I mean, not again.
I mean, we do a fair amount. I would put this more in kind of the tech bucket
Yeah.
and because and when you ask about kind of this idea of acquisition versus retention, what was so interesting about this research and ending up at something like The Crown Is Yours is that one of the things we heard was that it didn't apply to acquisition or retention. It could be both. And it was allowing the user and the bettor to be kind of the guide of their own journey. So The Crown Is Yours could mean betting across 10 sports for someone, or it could mean, having a little bit of skin in the game, which was something else that we tested. But, once someone was in, it was a bit more of an acquisition play. So I think a lot of this focused on more of our tech work and around kind of how people engage and, to Michael's point about, people bet across different platforms. So it was about understanding kind of mind share, time share, and how they could increase that and bring more of that to DraftKings.
Cool. I think we can turn it over to the floor for any questions. And in the meantime, is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't ask that you want to talk about?
I don't think so.
No, we covered? Okay, great. And from the floor, any questions?
Yep. I was curious if you guys could comment on DraftKings' expansion of their brand as they're looking to get more into the content side of DraftKings network and different collaborations. Do you see that as a growth market to enhance the sports betting side of things, or is that another totally separate revenue opportunity you guys are looking at?
I think the content side is a great way of just obviously continuing to build engagement with customers and being a resource for our players when they're thinking about whether it be betting or fantasy, like what are some of the, everyone's always craving information to be able to inform decision. And so as we think about as a brand, how are we finding all the ways that we can serve our customer and provide value? Content becomes a very obvious opportunity for us to continue to invest in from that perspective as well.
Cool. If there's no more questions, we do. Very good.
Good morning. It's actually been super fascinating just to watch how you all built your brand and the pace at which you're growing your fan base. I'm curious as you think about your content learning and how you approach it, fast cycle learning. So how do you balance what you need to move with in terms of speed of learning? And then also how do you institutionalize the learning in terms of best practices, in terms of what makes the best creative?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are, to your point, it's a very iterative process. I don't think that we tend to not have those sort of long lead times of, we're going to spend a year working on something and cross our fingers and hope that it goes well. It is a very iterative thing. And so I think that, it's a constant, reevaluation of what do we think is working and why, and then sharpening from there. So I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but I think a lot of the research that we actually just did with Hog Partners helped to uncover what are those drivers that really matter to people. We do track, brand tracker surveys as well that really get at that on an ongoing basis. So we can be looking at that in addition to what we're seeing in actual market performance to help sharpen our thinking around what messages are going to be the most relevant as the industry continues to evolve.
This is good. They're not letting you off.
What's that?
I think it's a build on the former question. So I believe you guys are getting into naming rights within stadiums, right? So experiences or clubs within certain stadiums within teams.
I actually don't have I wouldn't I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm not sure I'd probably be able to answer it. So go for it.
Okay. Yeah, my question was going to be how you assess which teams that you're partnering with to do that, and then how you're assessing the payback on those experiences within
yeah.
different teams.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Yeah, how does fantasy work? I'm of the generation that there's no fantasy happening. My son-in-law is really big time into fantasy.
How does fantasy sports work?
Yes.
So you get a salary cap that you're working with.
Okay.
The players that you're considering are all assigned
I just
salary.
learned the 2 New York baseball teams have the
So you-
highest salaries of any 2 baseball teams and are the worst 2 records.
You are building a team against salary cap that you're given, as is everybody else. And then you.
Is this a useful question for people in the audience? I
There's
think
another
I think it
question
is,
there,
and no
Paul.
one's willing to admit. Keep going. We're good.
There's a question right there.
Yeah, just knowing that the name DraftKings was built around fantasy and around drafting a fantasy team, was there any consideration to rebrand when you expanded more to the betting market, casino market? And if not, like what were some of the inputs that made you say we feel good about like our current brand equity?
Yeah, so we didn't consider renaming the company. I think there was a lot of awareness and equity in DraftKings to leverage, and in talking to consumers as we moved into spaces like online casino, it's been really interesting to see how much people understand why it would make sense for DraftKings to go there and give us permission to expand into new places. So it really has not been a barrier, so to speak. And so the opportunity is really to leverage the equity the brand has, especially as the industry evolves and more competition comes in. I think we have like a real advantage in our ability to not just name recognition, but the trust that we've built with our customers. And so that's something that we are excited to continue to lean into.
And as we designed the research for this, there were a number of different, we played with that idea of royalty, of Crown. I mean, obviously Crown is yours. And the one that played on or connected to DraftKings by far had, the best reaction. People really understood that, which was cool to see. And that was across audiences, across demographics, which we didn't necessarily expect.
Well, this is a good round of discussion with the audience. How about a big hand for our panelists? You.